Roger Wensil began working at the Savannah River plant in February 1984. Employed as a pipe fitter, his duties included performing work on the Defense Waste Processing Facility. This facility combines nuclear waste with glass so it can be disposed of safely. On the job, Roger Wensil encountered drug usage and drug sales. He was concerned about the damage that those under the influence of drugs could cause to the critical tasks they were performing.
And I went out to Savannah River plant, which builds part of the hydrogen bomb. And I started seeing people using drugs, carrying drugs around, exchanging drugs, selling drugs. And I thought to myself, hey, look, this is not the place for drugs. And I decided I talked around and to some of the people who did not use drugs. Hey, what's going on? Why so much drugs around here? I said, well, you know, that's just the way things are. So why aren't some of you people doing something about it? This is not my business. Well, I watched it, and I decided it was my business. So I went to the supervision, started telling them about it.
Roger Wensil witnessed the use, sale, and distribution of illegal narcotics at one of the nation's most sensitive atomic weapons facilities in the United States and perhaps the world. The Savannah River plant, which is a 125 square mile installation, which contains a number of reactors, waste storage, the works, what you need to build atomic weapons. And he saw people on drugs building that equipment in those facilities. He saw the exchange of phony time cards for drugs, where facilities that people were supposed to say work 30 or 40 hours building, instead of putting in the work that should have been put in, would just exchange illegal narcotics for sign-off on time cards. And he was scared, he was concerned.
To his surprise, Roger did not receive a favorable response from his supervisors.
Government or a large corporation, when you blow the whistle, two things happen. First, they discredit the whistleblower, and then they try to destroy the whistleblower. And that's not exaggeration, that's the truth. They're going to come after you with everything they've got. They've got a lot more money than you have to fight a case with. They'll put some high-powered lawyers on you. They'll dig into your past. They'll even fabricate stuff against you.
Instead of being rewarded for his concern for safety, Roger had to face harassment, was transferred to another site, and ultimately fired from his job.
After I'd been run off, fired from a job, well, they called it a layoff. Now, they waited 5 months and called it a layoff, but they laid me off on a day when they had transferred me out of my old area, a good area to work in. And they laid me off on a day when they hired 36 more men. And one of the things you can expect when you blow the whistle, no matter how good an employee you have been, no matter how loyal you have been, at that instant you become a totally unsatisfactory employee.
Roger found himself in a position of many whistleblowers. He's not an attorney. He's never taken a course on this. He's a blue-collar employee, a pipe fitter, but someone who was concerned. What do you do? He called the local police. He even called the FBI. But where do you go for protection? He wrote letters to Nancy Reagan, who at the time was giving speeches against drugs, never returned, no response. He wrote letters to his local congressmen and senators, no response, the brush off. And although these persons all publicly were against drug use, it's too close to home. It's in their own backyard. It's at their own plant. They didn't care. So he went through a long period of frustration, attorneys turning him down for any form of representation. And there came a time where one of those pleas fell upon attorneys who now work with the National Whistleblower Center. I was one of them back in 1986. He files a complaint with both the Department of Labor under a federal whistleblower law and with the Department of Energy under this local regulation they had. The Department of Energy investigates. The investigation is flawed. They set up a process in which Dupont and BF Shaw are allowed to have representatives in all the interviews of the employees. Mr. Wensil cannot have any representatives, cannot have any counsel in any of the interviews that occur. They don't put any of the witnesses under oath, and they essentially set up a little charade in which Roger Wensil is found guilty and his termination upheld. The Labor Department then initiates an investigation, and they rule for Roger. They find that the DOE procedures were flawed. They find that there's credible evidence of illegal drug use going up to high levels. They find that the grounds for his termination were completely fraudulent. But before the Labor Department issues the final report, the Department of Energy, the Department of Labor get together in Washington, D.C. at the cabinet level. This is around 1985. And they agree that the Department of Labor would withdraw jurisdiction of all whistleblowers at every Department of Energy atomic weapons facility in the United States. And they did that because of Roger Wensil. And what occurred was the report of the Department of Labor vindicating Roger was never issued. And instead, the Department of Labor states in a public proceeding that no longer will DOE whistleblowers be protected under federal law. We filed new papers, we reopened the Department of Energy and Labor Department proceedings, and at that point, things begin to change. The Washington Post gets very upset. They put a reporter on it. They view it as a major national news story. They interview, they question the Secretary of Energy at a press conference on this incident. The Secretary of Energy initiates an Inspector General review. The IG comes in and completely vindicates Mr. Wensil. They again find just about what the Department of Labor found the year before. They found that the local DOE used collusive and improper tactics in their initial investigation, that there was overwhelming evidence that Roger was illegally fired, all of which was ignored by the DOE, and they order Roger's reinstatement with full back pay.
In my case, I got lucky in one respect. They had the Department of Energy sent an Inspector General from D.C., Washington, D.C., down to Savannah River Plant to investigate my case. And their own Inspector General ruled against them, said, yep, you shafted Wensil, and you will put him back to work. And back then, who was the Secretary of Energy back then? Harrington. Secretary Harrington ordered me back to work. When I went back out there to go back to work, I felt like walking into dental lines. It was almost that bad too. It got bad and it stayed bad for a long time. And they put me in areas that were highly radioactive. Without me knowing it, I didn't have any training, radiation training. I didn't have any protective clothing. I didn't have any monitoring devices. And as I said, no training in protecting yourself in an RZ zone. And they put me in there, put me to work. I've got places on my legs that strange skin lesions. I lost my nose, basal cell carcinoma. This nose is a transplant from up here on top of my head. I've developed a heart condition, which I don't think, it's just, that might have come from the stress, the aggravation. This thing aggravates me so much. They come up with some of the most petty legal reasons to try to thwart Steve Mike's legal actions. The petty, silly reasons they use for saying, I have no basis for my legal case.
When Roger went back to work in 1987 and was faced with the cruel mistreatment, there was not one single legal remedy available to him. He could write a letter to the Secretary of Energy and hope, and that did not work.
And finally, it got so bad I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go. And it's a constructive discharge. I don't really understand the legal terminology myself, but it's what it amounts to. They put me in a position that was untenable. I could not stay, so they actually fired me. And for the second time, I haven't been back. I've been fighting for 8 years. If you're going to blow the whistle, get ready for a long, hard fight.
After his second termination, this is when he was run off a second time, we then filed suit in state court in South Carolina, and that proceeding was still awaiting a trial at the time of his death. Mr. Wensil blew the whistle at a time when there was no federal law protecting whistleblowers at these atomic weapons facilities. He was one of the very first whistleblowers and the real first major national whistleblower to come forward at a DOE facility. His allegations were scandalous, the conditions were outrageous, and his treatment he was open to any type of harassment with no remedy. It was because of Roger Wensil and a number of other whistleblowers at DOE who stood up when there was no protection that on October 24, 1992, a federal law was passed which now covers DOE whistleblowers. And that stripping of jurisdiction, which occurred in Roger Wensil's case in 1985, 1986, was reversed. And through an act of Congress, the government has now stated that DOE whistleblowers will have the same rights under federal laws as any other whistleblower under the Atomic Energy Act. Unfortunately, Roger was unable to benefit from that law. He had already been fired, and he has died. But other whistleblowers will be able to benefit, and in fact, a large number of complaints have been filed at plants such as Los Alamos and other plants where DOE whistleblowers are able to use those laws.
On October 24, 1992, the United States Congress strengthened the protections for whistleblowers under the Atomic Energy Act. Employees who blow the whistle on nuclear safety problems at either atomic weapons facilities owned by the Department of Energy or nuclear power plants regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission are protected under federal law from discrimination. Employees must file their discrimination complaint with the United States Department of Labor within 180 days of the discriminatory act. If successful, an employee is entitled to monetary and equitable relief, including back pay, reinstatement, attorney's fees, and costs and compensation for emotional distress and loss of professional reputation. Any employee who wants to blow the whistle at a nuclear facility or believes that he or she has been discriminated against in any way for raising safety concerns should contact the National Whistleblower Center at 517 Florida Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20001. Telephone 202-667-7515.